Our ancestors were not brave Anglo-Saxon supermen, nor mysterious Celtic warriors like Arthur. These origin myths, tying us to one pure race or another, do not do justice to our culture. We were not a weak and disorganized society overpowered by the Romans, nor did we dissolve into chaos when they left. We did not suffer a period of Dark Age confusion, and we never needed to be saved by the tribesmen of Anglo-Saxon legend. The real people of Britain AD did not only survive an influx of foreign influences, but actually flourished because of them. We absorbed Roman and later Byzantine and North European culture without losing a sense of our own identity. It is this ability to absorb and adapt, this creative plagiarism, which has always been at the heart of British identity. And this diversity is not just a feature of our distant past. It's a trait that can still be seen in every aspect of our life. Even our food. Robin Cook, former British Foreign Secretary, famously selected chicken tikka masala as Britain's national dish.
I believe that our national identity itself is a result of a blending of an enormous number of different inputs over the centuries, of different ethnic groups who've come here and settled here, become not so much absorbed, but have made their contribution, become part of the resultant mix, what we now recognize as our own national identity. And I think actually what makes Britain great, what makes us strong, is not purity, it is diversity. It's all those many different influences that have shaped our language, shaped our history, shaped our culture, and shaped our character.
We Britons are striding into the 21st century with all the confidence of our Victorian ancestors. But in planning the way ahead, we must keep an eye on the past. Because if we discard our sense of history, we'll be like people with no memory who don't know who they are. So to find the true origins of Britain AD, I've had to look beyond the headline-grabbing figures, the Romans, King Arthur and the Anglo-Saxons. And instead, I've turned to the real heroes of these lands, the ordinary Britons in their millions who invented our diverse and resilient culture. One final thought. This could be Indian or China tea, and it says on the packet it was grown in Kenya. Yet despite, or maybe because of these obvious foreign origins, this is still the best known symbol of Britain.
Okay, well this fine fellow is Francis Pryor. Given his full name, Francis Manning Marlborough Pryor, Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. And basically, just to keep this as concise as possible, really, Francis Pryor is an esteemed archaeologist from a very aristocratic line. And we'll get into all this as it progresses. I mean, in Francis Pryor's work, specifically on history, he is at pains to unexist the Anglo-Saxon root of the English people. And I mean, I'll put in just some short clips of his documentaries, but I think you'll probably, I think you'll probably read where it's going, in all honesty.
The conventional story about the making of England describes how the Britons sunk into a state of lethargy after the departure of the Roman troops. They were only revived by a massive infusion of Anglo-Saxon blood from the other side of the North Sea. These robust tribesmen arrived in boats along the eastern shores of Britain. It was a brave new world in which dark forests are felled and England is born. The trouble is, there is no archaeological evidence for the Anglo-Saxon invasion. The traditional story of the making of England is completely wrong. The real story will reshape our future and rewrite our past.
I wholly disagree with this. I think it's nonsense. His ideas, which I'll just preface here, he basically says there was no substantial Anglo-Saxon or Germanic invasion into Britain. There was some migration, which has always been normal and is a benefit to society in Francis Pryor's frame. But there was no there was no conflict. And basically what happened is the existing population just basically stayed there and just took on Anglo-Saxon culture wholly. I mean, this is nonsense. There's numerous reasons why it's nonsense. The most painfully clear reason why this is nonsense is the linguistic evidence. Now, prior to the arrival of Anglo-Saxons in England, the Brythonic peoples spoke essentially, a quote-unquote Celtic language, Brythonic. This is a completely different language group to Old English, as it would later become known. Now, in Francis Pryor's theory, these Anglo-Saxons, they drifted in, and the Brythonic said, "Hey guys, how you doing? Hey, yeah, let's exchange cultures. I like your culture. I'm going to completely turn away from my entire Brythonic roots, and I'm going to just completely eradicate any traces of Brythonic language from my speech, and I'm going to start worshipping your gods, and I'm going to start dressing like you, and maybe I'll grow an inch or two." Essentially, I mean, I've been slightly hyperbolic, but let's just look at the numbers here. I mean, it is farcical. It is farcical that this is even considered when you just look at this. Okay, these are words. These are secure Brythonic loans in Old English. Okay, so on this basis, the Anglo-Saxons came in and they all drank lots of mead together and got together, and they took Brythonic wives, and presumably the men took Anglo-Saxon wives as well, because they were all friends, right? Okay. In this basis, you would expect there to be a complete blend of language. However, if you look at secure Brythonic loan words in Old English, how many do you think there are? Just have a little think. There's between 5 and 10, right? And the definitely Celtic from this list is badger, which is from the root broch. A bench, something you sit on in a park, is a binson. A cradle is a cradol. A pool or a bog, the topographic term, a lure. And a hook or a crook is a crog. That's it. That's it for the definitely 100% quote-unquote Celtic. Then you've got highly likely a dune, which is a hill, as in Dunstable, Dunwich. A lureman is a pool man, someone by a lake, basically a man of a lake. And a prion, which is a pin, which is possibly from the Welsh pren, tree stroke wood, but is debated. So that's it. That's it. So in this great cultural exchange, when everyone was getting together and drinking mead and all the rest of it, and having a great time, and having a rich exchange of cultures, they just decided to completely eradicate any trace of their own language. And not only that, but they also decided that they would presumably infiltrate the areas to the peripheries, to the west, the external, the sort of poor quality land, which you would assume is where people might be driven to, such as, Cornwall, Wales, northwest England, in the mountains of Cumbria, this kind of area. They presumably infiltrated, and they carried out a psyop on those people in those countries so that they would start adopting folk history based on the fact that they were driven from their lands by Anglo-Saxon invaders. I mean, again, it's just utter nonsense. You know what I mean? The Welsh have a word for England, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's Hlothger, something like that, and it literally means the lost land. Where does this come from, Francis? Apart from your imagination, your Fabianist imagination. It's absolute nonsense. And I mean, I should say as well, sorry, so that's the secure, this is 0.01% of Old English is from Brythonic origin. 0.01%. Right, okay. Now, if we look at the comparative example here is the Norman invasion, when you had a new elite arrive, at the end of a sword, with a fairly substantial army and a lot of soldiers. I mean, I'm doing this off memory, but I think they brought about 50,000 in the first 5 years. And this was into 1 million population, approximately, in England. So it was like an extra 20th of the population, as it were. I think that balanced out with the ones they killed in the fucking north, to be honest with you. But whatever. They ruled England. That elite ruled England and spoke French, and did not really adopt English for quite some time. And the linguistic blueprint is there all over it. This is why you have French words remain in the army and in the police. Magistrate, judiciary, judge, all this kind of stuff. And it's a cliche, but the Anglo-Saxon words like pig, cow, and then when it's on when it's in a field, it's a pig and a cow. When it's on a table, e.g. being served, it's pork or it's beef, which both come from French origin, etc., etc., etc. Even then, though, with this rule of England and the English in a far more kind of controlled manner, far more controlled than would have occurred, in the 4th century, 5th century, following the collapse of Rome. Far more centralized. Because back then it would have just been people in some distant village. But I mean, if you fast forward 600 years to the Norman conquest, the levels of control were far in excess of that. And yet Old English still accounts for, if we're talking about the kind of words you use on a daily basis, it's like 80% of English. And the Normans came in, and the Normans took English wives, specifically the aristocracy, because it was just a way to get lands. That was kind of part of their MO, like legally, to take lands. They'd just take a wife and then just take all the land, sort of from the Anglo aristocracy, as it were. And the soldiers obviously did as well, and all the rest of it. Now, the story goes is that the woman then gave birth, and obviously, she's raising the child, and she uses the Old English with the child, and blah blah blah, and thus and the nannies and all the rest of it, and the servants and the tutors were English. So over a period of time, Old English won out essentially. But that took a long time. Henry V was the first king, and that was 1410, something like that, who made English the official language of the royal court. So it's a long time. And yet, as I say, 80% of the words you use on a daily basis will be of Old English root. So, this did not happen at all. Well, significantly at all in the Norman conquest. But according to Francis Pryor, these Brythonic, what does he think they thought? Oh, let's just give up our culture. Let's just give up Christianity. Let's just adopt everything that these new people have, and let's move to slightly different locations and build villages there. It's utter nonsense, and probably just wasting time talking about how much nonsense it is. But this is what he is at pains to point out in his Channel 4 documentaries. So, with all that said, let's just have a look at Mr. Pryor himself. Okay, so a bit of edit point here. I'm just coming back to this the next day, basically because I get into his ancestry, which I find quite interesting, but it is quite lengthy, and I think it kind of interrupts the flow of this, as it were. So I'm going to put that at the end. You can listen to it if you're interested. Just to summarise it, essentially he is of the landed gentry. He's of Anglo-Irish extraction. They are very, they're impressive people, essentially. His father was an MBE. His grandfather, his paternal grandfather, had a distinguished military career. He won a DSO in the First World War, which is it's very early, distinguished service order, and had a bar added to that, which means that he was an extremely brave and capable soldier. So, fair play, as I go on to say in that piece there. His great-grandfather was a Sir. He was knighted for his contribution to medicine, or he was a writer on the subject of medicine. He was quite brilliant, it would seem. And, there's Darwin kind of rubs up there. I think that man, Sir Norman Moore, his great-grandfather, was friends with, I think it was Darwin's daughter, and then his great-uncle, so Sir Norman Moore's other son, married a Darwin. So there's a lot of crossover. Then you go further back, you have Samuel Hoare, who was a Quaker and an abolitionist and a banker. So as I go on to state, I am suspicious ultimately of the Quakers when you see them in these kind of positions. Now, I don't think this is all Quakers, but the Quakers I kind of view as nonconformist Jesuits. There's just a lot of people from Quaker extraction that end up into these kind of Fabianist adjacent sort of groups, quote unquote operations. As I say, I don't think there's anything wrong with being an abolitionist. I don't think abolitionism was a bad thing. I think it was a good thing, and I'm proud of the fact that Britain did abolish the slave trade. However, it is also worth pointing out that a lot of people who were prominent abolitionists then went on to become, their ancestors or their descendants went on to become what you might call the proto-Fabianist kind of ruling class, essentially. And then, there is a few other bits of pieces which is worth mentioning. And I'll just point to this. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's frivolous, but he does seem to rub up with all this, family history. His father was an MBE. He would go on to become an MBE himself, all the rest of it. Cambridge and Trinity, all these great contacts within the British, I don't want to say ruling elite, but, certainly adjacent to that. Who would pop up in 1963 but Brian Epstein with an intriguing offer? What are the chances? Now, Epstein, he's involved with the British... it's an operation. He ran an operation, the Beatles, I believe, I think there's an awful lot of second matrix. There's an awful lot of fluff around the Beatles, as I've come to discover, regarding a lot of Paul is Dead and all the rest of it. However, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That was absolutely an intelligence operation. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, all the rest of it. And it was carried. The key figures would be George Martin and Brian Epstein. Anyway, Brian Epstein offered him a job in 1963. I'll just read the quote. Pryor almost ended up not becoming an archaeologist at all. After organising a college May ball during his time at Cambridge, he was offered a job by Brian Epstein's North End Music Stores, NEMS, the agency that handled the Beatles. Quote, I was offered a job as a road manager at the then unheard of sum of £50 a week. Most people at the time were earning £5 or £6 a week. Now, to be clear, £50 in 1965, that's got the spending power of around £1,200 today. So he was basically offered £5,000 a month as an 18-year-old to get involved in the Beatles as a road manager, because he's organised a Cambridge May ball. That seems to have caught Brian Epstein's wandering eye. Well, fair enough. I would say that it's I say that points to a level of connectivity, as it were. Maybe he understands that Pryor is of a certain... Well, he's not of a certain group, I don't believe, but he's of a certain route within the British... I don't like the term deep state, but you know what I mean. He's an impressive figure from an impressive pedigree, and just the kind of man you would want within the Beatles operation, it would seem. But anyway, he did decline it. He wanted to go off and work in the family brewery, which he then regretted, it would seem. There is also the Beatles, allegedly, connections don't end there, because in 1973, who would come to tea but Viv Stanshall? Which is interesting. Now, Viv Stanshall, I don't really believe, in all honesty. I don't go all in on this Billy Shears. I don't go all in on Paul is Dead anymore. I've come to regard it with some suspicion, to be honest. But I think there was probably some degree of crossover, and I'm pretty sure that Stanshall was connected with these kind of people. It was probably a Freemason, it was Fabianist, this kind of surreal stuff. Yeah, I don't doubt it at all. If you want to go for the orthodox Billy Shears narrative, Vivian Stanshall was a sort of creation of Billy Shears, essentially, and he wanted to sort of carry on with his surrealist kind of, end of peer music in another form rather than just the Beatles. So he kind of created the character of Viv Stanshall, and he hired Street Viv, who's the very tall guy that is sometimes presented as Stanshall. That's the narrative. I don't really buy it. I just think that they were probably friends, they were probably connected, and they just thought, let's swap roles here and there for a bit of a lark. That's my reading of it. That will cause some people to wail and gnash their teeth, no doubt, but that's basically my reading of it. Well, anyway, Street Viv, so not Paul McCartney, because I'm looking at the picture and I'll put it on the screen. He came to tea in 1973. If you want to get really tinfoily, I don't know, I don't really believe. Well, okay, I'll leave it out there. In the little blog post which he's talked about meeting Viv Stanshall, or Stanshall coming to tea, he doesn't really say anything about their friendship. He just say, Viv Stanshall came to tea in 1973, visited their family. So in this same quite short blog post, he basically recounts Viv Stanshall coming to tea. And then, after that, and then Viv went off and blah, blah, blah. And then he says, we loaded the album into the car. So he put the Viv Stanshall album into the car and headed off. Anyway, we loaded the album into the car and headed southwest, away from the Fens. We had barely left Peterborough behind us when there was a sickening bang and an offside rear wheel tyre blew out. Maisie, who was driving at the time, did well to steer off the dual carriageway and onto the verge. Changing the wheel was hairy as only lorries pulled over. It basically says he basically got involved in it could have been a car crash. I don't know. As I say, I've come to realise that a lot of Paul is Dead is second Matrix fluff. Some people will take that as some sort of revelation of the method. He loaded the Viv Stanshall album into the car and then had a blowout which could have been fatal. Well, you can do what you like with that information, to be honest with you. It's worth noting. Okay, so what does any of this mean? Well, I would suggest that Francis Pryor is very much of what you might call broader Fabianist root at the heart of the British establishment. Certainly one which holds sway currently, and in recent years has been carrying out numerous death of a thousand cuts style psychological operations against the British people. One of which, it would seem, would be severing the ancestral root of the English people and embedding what I believe an entirely false notion that they are just like this sponge and they can absorb cultures, and let's have a cultural exchange with all these new people, new arrivers. This is normal, guys. This has always happened. It's just nonsense. As I've pointed, the linguistic evidence alone should tell you it's nonsense. And I mean, it's just beyond all that. When you look at the folk history of, the Bretons, the Cornish, the Welsh, they all state the same. The Germanics came from the east, drove them from their land. They're very bitter about it. Why did Brittany rebrand as Brittany when prior to that it was called Amorica? I mean, okay, that you can say that that's the Roman, maybe, but it was the land by the sea, Amorica. But then it rebranded in the 5th and 6th centuries, just coinciding with the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain, or England. And it rebranded as Brittany, and they all decided to, feel very aggrieved about something that didn't happen, according to Francis Pryor, which was the Anglo-Saxon invasion and their peoples being driven to new lands and from their old. I mean, the Welsh, it's the most clearest. I mean, I believe in ancestral memory. I believe the Welsh have an ancestral memory of, being driven from their lands. As I said earlier, they have a word for England, Loch Ger. They also refer to the English, I mean, they call the English Sais, which literally means Saxon. Is this all a psyop on them? Have they got like cultural amnesia and Francis Pryor is there to correct it all? It's just drivel. I mean, the whole Arthurian myth, this great Celtic, war leader who held back the tide for some time, the tide of cultural exchange when they're all sitting around, wife swapping and drinking mead or whatever in Francis Pryor's head. I mean, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. The Anglo-Saxons came in and they won the land, it would seem to me. Now, if he wants to say, well, there's no great, where's the great battle sites? I mean, there are some. There's the one near Bath, I believe. The name escapes me at the moment. There's a number of them. Maybe the Britons just, they took a fucking pasting and they got the message. The jig's up. I don't know. But it's quite categoric that his whole precis is based, I believe at least, in a Fabian agenda to instill cultural amnesia in the English people in order for them to accept, ultimately, their own destruction.